Hey everybody, it's draft season, and I'd be remiss if I didn't use this as an opportunity for shameless plugging of a book I wrote last year, On the Clock, behind the scenes of the Calgary Flames at the NHL Draft. It is a almost painfully extensive history of the Flames franchise at the draft, dating back to the 1972 expansion draft, the first NHL entry draft they were in, all the way to more modern times. Obviously, it was written a couple of years ago, so it basically takes you up until the very end of Brad Treliving's run as general manager of the Flames, but it's full of interviews, full of history. If you haven't read it already, feel heartily encouraged to pick it up. I'd really appreciate it. It's available everywhere you get books, online and or in physical retailers. Now, here's an actual video about the Flames and the NHL Draft. Well, it's draft season. As I'm recording this video, we are about 3 weeks away from the 2025 NHL Draft, and typically there's a lot of excitement about the draft across the league, because not only is it a chance for many young men to have their lifelong dreams come true and be drafted by an NHL club, the culmination of literally years of hard work by them and sacrifices by their families to get them to that point. But it's also, in a broader sense, for pretty much every NHL team, their first real opportunity to revamp your hockey club. And so typically what we've seen in the past is the period from the NHL's draft combine until the day of the draft, the second day of the draft, usually until the end of the draft. There's a ton of trade activity. And so as we head into this coming NHL draft, one question I've heard from a lot of folks is, hey, when's Craig Conroy going to make some moves? And I would suggest pointing at the history of the Calgary Flames since Craig Conroy's been in hockey operations dating back to 2011. The short answer is odds are probably between now and the NHL draft. So as we prepare for the festivities in the coming weeks and potentially for some moves by the Flames in the coming weeks, I figure let's take a look at why I think the Flames will probably make some moves in the next coming weeks, using Flames history as a barometer for why I say that. Let's dive in. So this will make everyone involved feel old and sound old, and I apologize in advance, but I've been covering the Flames since Craig Conroy's been in hockey operations. My first year covering the team was the year he retired, and so he's been in hockey operations since before the 2011 draft. And so this coming draft will be the 15th NHL draft since Craig Conroy retired and joined the Flames management group. And so Craig has been in 3 separate roles, and the Flames have made moves with him in these 3 separate roles. So we're going to split up the Conroy era of Flames hockey ops into sort of 3 little periods. Period 1 is Craig Conroy when he was the special assistant to the general manager. Then a longer period when he was the assistant general manager. And then the last couple of years when he's been the general manager of the team. And obviously, as you move up and your job title becomes a little bit less of a mouthful, the amount of power you have increases. And so I think it's probably fair to say Craig Conroy, general manager, is more influential than Craig Conroy, special assistant to the general manager. He's more experienced. He's learned a lot. But I also think that, being the special assistant to Jay Feaster, working with Brian Burke and working as the assistant GM underneath Brad Treliving, probably did influence how Craig operates going forward. And so we can use these last 15 years as a pretty good way of estimating the things that he might do and the things that he probably could do between now and the end of the draft. So let's dive in, and let's start off with Craig Conroy as the special assistant. So during the Jay Feaster years, the Flames began, I would say, a trend I'll call problem solving at the draft. And by that I mean, year to year, you can sort of see the Flames go into the draft period and have some needs and some wants and some things they thought they could do in the offseason. And case in point, let's start off with 2011. So in June 2011, the Flames were, they hadn't made the playoffs in a couple of years. They hadn't had a lot of success, but they had some confidence that, if they kept things together, they could get to the other side of the cut line and maybe make some noise once they made the playoffs. And so they had to make some decisions. At the end of the 2010-11 season, Alex Tanguay was set to become an unrestricted free agent. And the Flames at that point were sort of looking at the roster and going, okay, we really like Alex Tanguay. He's really good at Jarome Iginla. How do we keep this group together? And so a thing they wanted to do was open up some cap space so that they could keep the band together, so to speak, keep Tanguay and Iginla together as a unit. And so the decision that they made was, hey, we could probably live without Robin Regehr. And so they ended up putting together this particular trade. The trade that we're talking about is trading Robin Regehr, Aleš Kotelík, and a second-round pick to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Paul Byron and Chris Butler. Chris Butler, at the time, young defenseman, had already established himself as a pretty decent young NHLer. He was pretty solid. Maybe he had some upside that they hadn't tapped yet. Paul Byron at that point has sort of been bouncing up and down from the AHL and the NHL, and he hadn't really gotten his teeth sunk into the NHL yet, but there's a lot of confidence that he could become a pretty decent NHL player. Meanwhile, for the Flames, Robin Regehr was, heading into his 30s, and if you'd seen Robin Regehr play, for those of you unfamiliar with Robin Regehr, Robin Regehr was a beast. And by that I mean he loved crushing guys along the boards and blocking shots. He played a very physical style of game, both using his body as a weapon against other players and using his body as a barricade against the puck. And you play that style long enough, it's going to wear you down. And so at that point, the Flames went, Regehr is probably not going to age too well. Maybe we can make some moves with him now. And then Kotelík's deal was terrible. He'd been waived the year before. Nobody picked him up. And so the Flames threw a second rounder in there as a sweetener to get Aleš Kotelík's contract off their books. And this trade went through. Regehr waived his no move clause or his no trade clause, and they made the move. And it allowed them the cap space to retain Alex Tanguay, and that's what happened. Flash forward 2 years later, and the Flames had begun a rebuild. The previous March, the Flames had traded Jarome Iginla. They had also traded Jay Bouwmeester. Mika Kaprizov was largely expected to announce his retirement. He announced his retirement later in the summer. And so, Alex Tanguay had a lot of value for the Flames when he was riding shotgun to Jarome Iginla. If Jarome Iginla is gone, would Alex Tanguay be a good fit for what the team wanted to do going forward? Would he be a player that you want to have around during a retooling process, rebuilding process? And the conclusion they reached was no, and so they made a trade. And so Tanguay and Corey Sarich were traded to Colorado in exchange for Shane O'Brien and a young man by the name of David Jones. And, it was a trade that probably worked best for both teams, given where they were. Colorado got a bit more veteran savvy. The Flames got a couple guys who would be able to help them out in the short term. But, it is kind of interesting how substantial moves were made in 2011 to keep Alex Tanguay in the fold. And then flash forward 2 years, substantial moves were made to get him out of town. Now, the next big move the Flames made was under Brad Treliving. And at that point, Craig Conroy was an assistant general manager. Treliving was, at that point, wheeling and dealing. The Flames had gone on a pretty miraculous run to the second round of the 2015 Stanley Cup playoffs. They had done so without Mark Giordano. He'd become injured almost immediately before the trade deadline in 2015. And yet the Flames made some decent moves at the trade deadline. They traded Sven Baertschi for a draft pick. They traded pending UFA Curtis Glencross for 2 draft picks. So they had a bunch of draft picks to maneuver with. And so during the first day of the draft, rumors started to spread. I hear Boston and Dougie Hamilton are pretty far apart on a new contract. And at the time, Dougie Hamilton had just finished up his entry-level deal. And by the time anyone really knew that Dougie Hamilton might have been available, he was a Calgary Flame. And, Treliving rushed to the front of the line with a bunch of draft picks that he had. He only ended up spending half of the Flames draft picks. They still had, after this trade, they moved a first and 2 seconds. They still had a second and 2/3. And so they were able to still get some decent players out of that year's draft and Dougie Hamilton. So if you're the Flames and you went, need to upgrade the blue line after that playoff run, yeah, not a bad bit of business. So by the following summer, the Flames had a different problem. At that point, the Flames had gone through another season, and they decided their goaltending was up to snuff. They missed the playoffs, and Brad Treliving decided, okay, let's solve this problem in the draft. And so the Flames traded a second-round pick and a conditional third-round pick to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for Brian Elliott. At the time, Brian Elliott only had a year left in his contract, and the thought was, okay, worst case scenario, you're buying a year of Brian Elliott for a second-round pick. Had they re-signed Brian Elliott, the third-round pick would have also gone to St. Louis, but they opted not to for various reasons we don't need to get into. But, Brian Elliott ended up backstopping the Flames to another playoff year. They didn't go particularly far in that playoffs, but if the idea was you're trying to at least solve a problem in the short term with throwing draft picks at it, yeah, seemed to work out reasonably well for them. Flash forward another year, and the Flames went back to the draft and had another problem they wanted to try to resolve. This time, they felt that they needed a bit of physicality and stay-at-home defensive acumen to their team. And so this time, they ended up using sort of the same kind of formula they used for the Dougie Hamilton trade. First and 2 seconds to the New York Islanders for Travis Hamonic. In this particular case, Travis Hamonic had some term left in his contract, and so the idea was maybe Hamonic wasn't a player with the kind of upside that Dougie Hamilton had, but you're paying a premium for particular attributes that the Flames valued, and more importantly, you're paying a premium for a player who's cost-controlled and under contract for a certain number of years. So you didn't need to figure out new contract for him. You didn't need to, deal with a lot of headaches after the fact. You just bought the player, bought the contract, and you didn't have to worry about it, and then you could work on other things. And so, yeah, the Flames ended up doing this, and ironically enough, a couple of the picks in this transaction were already conditionally hung up in a trade the Flames had made at the trade deadline a year earlier for Mike Smith, and so this caused a bit of a nesting doll of trade conditions that the Flames had to navigate for the next couple of years. If this sounds familiar, this is the same kind of thing that ended up happening for the Flames with the Sean Monahan, Matthew Tkachuk trades and the many years of obscure trade conditions that the Flames had to deal with that. This is the Diet Pepsi version of this, nowhere near as painful to deal with, nowhere near as complicated, but perhaps a bit of a preview that Brad Treliving loved including wacky trade conditions in every trade he made. And finally, the last major draft trade that Brad Treliving made, and if it feels like echoes of the Alex Tanguay saga under Jay Feaster, it probably should. The Flames, by 2018, they liked Dougie Hamilton. They didn't love Dougie Hamilton. Dougie Hamilton proved to have some warts in his game that they didn't love. Great offensive player. You work in progress defensively to the point where, it was risky enough on the ice that they didn't really have the stomach for it anymore. And so Dougie Hamilton, with some term left, was traded with Adam Fox and Michael Ferland. Adam Fox at the time, highly touted defensive prospect from college, not under contract, made it known that he wasn't going to sign with the Flames, would rather play out east closer to home. Flames decided to move on from him before the value came out of that proposition. Michael Ferland, very good physical forward, probably in line to get a big pay increase on his next contract. He had a year left at the time the Flames traded him. The Flames determined that good player, loved him, did not feel they could be paying him what he would probably want to be paid in his next contract. So, see you, Michael Ferland. Thank you for everything. And the Flames got back, strangely enough, in a move that echoed what happened with the Dougie Hamilton trade in 2015. Elias Lindholm and Noah Hanifin were both restricted free agents with Carolina, coming off of their entry-level deals, much like Hamilton in 2015. They weren't quite seeing eye to eye with the Hurricanes on their new deals. The Hurricanes didn't want to, they were happy to not have to deal with protracted negotiations for these guys. And so they went to Calgary, and Carolina got some decent players out of it. If you've been following the Flames, you'll know that in 2024, the Flames eventually did move on from Noah Hanifin and Elias Lindholm with some trades during the period before the trade deadline. They end up getting quite a bit for Lindholm and a little bit less for Hanifin. But, this was a continuation of a very lengthy trade tree. And also, again, just sort of another example of Brad Treliving trying to deal with roster construction issues at the NHL draft when everyone's around and in the mood to make some trades. And Now, Craig Conroy's only been general manager for a couple of years, and he's been busy. He inherited a lot of expiring deals from Brad Treliving when Brad Treliving departed the organization, and the first one he dealt with was Tyler Tfoley. Tyler Tfoley would, they had discussions over a new contract. It became pretty clear that they just weren't on the same page, and so they made a trade the day before the NHL draft in Nashville, with Tfoley going to New Jersey and the Flames obtaining Yegor Sharangovich and a third-round draft pick. And the third-round draft pick was used a couple days later to draft Idar Suniev out of the BCHL's Penticton Vs, and he has since moved on to play a couple years at UMass and then signed with the Flames and made his NHL debut at the end of the season in 24-25. And so, it's the first of many dominoes that had to fall in terms of expiring contracts with Conroy as general manager. Spoiler, there's more of those to come in this video. Again, you have expiring contracts, you have roster problems you got to deal with, and once again, the NHL draft, everyone's around. It's proven to be a pretty decent time to deal with those issues. And finally, 2024, last year's draft, was a pretty busy period of time for Conroy. 9 days out from the draft, he traded Jacob Marstrom with some salary retained to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Kevin Ball and what ended up being a 2025 first-round pick. Marstrom almost got traded before the 2024 trade deadline as part of the roster teardown, the overhaul that Conroy was engaged in. It didn't end up coming to fruition. We can, I don't know if we'll ever know the entire story behind what happened there, but yeah, it's Marstrom thought he was going to be traded reportedly, then he was not traded before the deadline. He played out the rest of the season, and then he ended up being traded to New Jersey anyway before the NHL draft. And then there was another trade, because the day before the draft in Vegas, Andrew Mangiapane, again with another year left in his contract, got traded to the Washington Capitals for a second-round pick. The second-round pick was actually Colorado's that Washington had previously acquired from the Avalanche. And, again, much like with this wasn't so much a deal that had to be done, but I would sort of put this in the Tfoley ledger in terms of there's a lot of trades that Conroy made during the 2023 and 2024 years where you went, ooh, well, he had to do it then because contract was expiring. Mangiapane had a year left in his deal, but he was also a guy where you probably wanted to start making some room for the Flames' young wingers, some guys in the system they wanted to get longer looks at. And Mangiapane with a year left, you probably needed to make a decision if he was going to be there long term by that point. And the decision they made was probably not. And so you get ahead of the game. You basically get in a situation where you don't enter the 24-25 season with hypothetically 5 guys in expiring contracts that you need to make decisions on in season. And so you get ahead of the game, you make some decisions, and much like the previous eras under Treliving and under Feaster, it was a lot of, okay, here's a problem I need to deal with right this moment because there's a looming deadline ahead of me, or there's some dominoes that are going to fall. I want to get ahead of them. This was, a situation where Conroy was working ahead of sort of some things that would become more pressing later on. But my guess is coming off of a year where he had to deal with a lot of stuff with looming deadlines all at once, and it was probably a bit stressful for him. If you get ahead of the game and you move on from the guys you need to move on from in advance of any deadlines, you get to sort of set your own pace, and you don't really need to have agents or other teams or deadlines of any kind sort of breathing down your neck saying you got to do something. So, it's different ways of doing things between the 3 eras of Conroy's time here under 3 different managers, 4 if you want to count Brian Burke. There's a lot of different ways of doing things, and I think we've sort of seen how Conroy has operated and potentially been influenced under those periods. Well, past behavior, as I've mentioned, is a good predictor of future behavior. And if you're using the last 14 years of Craig Conroy at the draft as an active participant or merely as a special assistant, most of the time they make some moves. Craig Conroy has been in hockey up since 2011 when he was hired on as a special assistant to GM Jay Feaster. And through 14 drafts in 8 of them, the Flames have made a fairly significant trade, either in the immediate run up to that draft or during the draft itself. And, in some of the drafts, they've made a couple. Case in point, 2024, that's 2 big moves that Craig Conroy made rather than the one we typically see. And even in the years where they haven't made big moves, so to speak, they've still done stuff for the most part. There's been very rare as the years where they do absolutely nothing. Sometimes they trade down and get picks. Sometimes they make smaller moves like trading for Brandon Bollig or trading for Tyler Pitlick. So odds are, if you're someone going, oh boy, am I going to have something to sink my teeth into as a fan during the NHL draft weekend or the period before it, historically, the answer is probably yeah. You could probably expect the Flames to do something in terms of some kind of transaction, some kind of trade of some sort based on history. We can't guarantee it. We're not going to make any predictions to what's going to happen, but odds are they're going to do something based on history and based on how the Flames GMs, dating back to Jay Feaster through Brad Treliving, how many of them have actually made significant moves at the draft in order to address any roster needs or looming contractual decisions. So, if you're on the fence about carving out time for the NHL draft, no, you weren't. You were going to watch it anyway. But I'd still say, if you're a big Flames fan and you're excited for roster additions or trades or whatever, it's worth your time to carve out some time. So don't be far away from your phone or from your TV or from your radio, because there's usually something to sink your teeth into from a fan and roster standpoint. We can't guarantee anything, but based on history, it's not a bad bet. That's everything we got for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you really like this video, please click the subscribe button. And as always, if you got ideas for future videos, throw them down into the comments, and I'll do my best to take a look and take care of them. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.